All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Leadership in Action. I am Renee Meddy, Senior Partner at Orca HR, and I'm here with Paul Byrne, who is our CEO. And if you're new here, we show up weekly for 15 minutes to share common leadership challenges with actionable tips that you can implement right away. So today's topic is managing former peers. So the challenge in that is like one day you're a peer, and then the next day you're the boss. And there's a different dynamic shift when that happens. So conversations may feel different, your expectations and your peers' expectations may change, and there's just that fine line of authority and trust. So how do you lead former colleagues without being too controlling or too lenient and finding that balance? So the question we want to pose today, and we'll give you about a minute or two just to jot some notes down, is to think back, what challenges did you experience if you were in that position where you moved from managing, from being a peer to managing your peers? All right. So Paul, I know you've been in this position. What are some of the common challenges that you've experienced or that you've heard others talk about when they move in this direction?
Yeah, when you asked that question, it brought me back in time in terms of thinking about the first time I had been promoted to manager. And, I think being a little wiser now, I like one of the key things I think when people get promoted to manager, you're very excited. I got promoted to manager. I think the first thing they have to realize that a promotion to a manager is not just a promotion. It's a career change. And it requires a mindset shift and a whole new set of skills. And so I think that's one of the first common mistakes is that people say, okay, I'm up here, now I'm a manager. And they kind of think about, okay, I'm going to act like what I'm doing, except now I'm just going to be either supervising or managing these people. And I think the first thing is to embrace that change, that I am going to have to learn a new set of skills and that I am going to have a shift in mindset. So now it's about, how do I get work done through other people? And how do you work that, walk that fine line between, too much authority, too little authority on the other end, and sort of building trust and relationships with people who, they're going to be judging you. You were their peer today, and they're going to say, okay, like I might have applied for that job too, and I'm going to sort of evaluate it. And so embracing that, I think, is one of the first things. And I know you and I were talking about this a little earlier, and that's kind of, I think, one of the first mistakes people make is they kind of like, want to sort of say, oh, look, I can do this. I don't need help. I'm in it. And they're feeling it, and people know that they're feeling it. So yeah, being vulnerable and embrace that. And you even talked about being very transparent.
Yeah. It's like the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Like, you know that I know and they know that I know.
Exactly.
And just acknowledging, like, this may feel uncomfortable, or there might be some, bumps along the way.
Yeah, or just say, hey guys, I'm new in this role. I need you to help me be successful in it, right? And we want to work together to make things and create an environment. So sort of setting some goals and talk a little bit about your values and what you want to have, but embrace that sort of vulnerability, and people will appreciate you for that.
It reminds me, it is hard to do it sometimes. It reminds me of an earlier Leadership in Action chat we had about what's the conversation that you're avoiding right now?
Avoiding.
And this would definitely be one of them for some people. So
Yeah, and like one of the challenges that sometimes people have is they're almost afraid to lead. So and so sometimes they'll over instruct, and and then other times they will under instruct. So like you'll have one person who feels very insecure, and they will be afraid to delegate everything, because if people don't do it as good as I do it, well, then that reflects on me. But then the problem is they're not developing the people, they're taking too much on themselves, and they're not sort of doing the role that's expected. I think I shared with you once, in my very first manager role, I was kind of over sort of engaged with some of my people. And I remember one of my supervisors said to me, hey, let us do our role and you do your role. And so understanding what your role is, I think the other thing too is that sometimes it's kind of like how much hands-on approach and how much hands-off approach. And sometimes that can depend on the people that you are managing. Some people need much more instructions, and other people need maybe a little less instructions. And so being able to understand different people. So building relationships is really, really key when you start, and building trust and respect.
And we talk about this part a lot. Like you always talk about the balcony and the dance floor. It's moving from being on the dance floor and siloed into the thing that you need to get done versus being able to, like you talk about the balance of how do you kind of pull out and see the bigger overview and how everything and everyone connects as part of the vision. And then knowing when to be able to be back on the dance floor and for how long.
And why do you think sometimes people are too hands off when they get into the first role, into a new role?
Some of it, I think, at least what I've experienced, is that's what they think they're supposed to do. Like we swing on this pendulum of like being all the way over here or all the way over here. And sometimes it's avoidance. And I think that's where the importance of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, some of the 4 A's that we talk about is like really understand who you are and who's in front of you, and seeing what their strengths are, seeing what might be getting in their way so you can help develop them.
And sometimes people will like not address conflict because it feels very uncomfortable.
And especially when you're a peer.
Especially when they're a peer. Oh, well, how do I talk to this individual?
Yeah.
And one of the things, and so they avoid it. And so when they avoid it, what happens then is, and we've talked a little bit about this, there's a lack of clarity, right? And the people don't know, well, okay, so they're doing something that you should be addressing. There's conflict on the team. You're not addressing, other people are looking at it. And so that's where you have to develop these skills,
And realignment of the vision.
Right, yeah.
Right? Because like you said earlier when we were having this conversation about like one day you're having lunch with this person and then the next day you're managing
in a performance review.
Right, with a performance review. And so there's probably some conversations, or like maybe you don't get along with somebody else on the team, or you didn't like your last boss, and now this person that's reporting to you is like, oh shoot, like I said all these things and now this person is doing my performance review.
Evaluate me. Yeah.
So as the leader, a strong leader, I would share with people that you would have that conversation and acknowledge that and say, I know we've had these conversations. I just want you to know, like, this is a clean slate. So it requires self-regulation. It requires understanding yourself and being able to navigate that.
Right. And then, like the performance review is not about the performance review. It's what do we do up to the performance review?
Yeah.
So like, and this is where you have to learn the skills of, okay, how do I set clear goals with each of these individuals, right? Yeah. And then how do I, give feedback? And so like setting clear goals and giving feedback they're not things that come naturally, Today, say, for example, you know, and I saw this a lot, where you have somebody who's like a developer, or they're a tester, or they're a program manager, and now they're going to have to manage a whole group of people. They were an individual contributor. And
Yeah.
sometimes they continue to do what they do very, very well, which is they continue to like lead very well in the technical aspect of their job, but the people aspect of their job is very uncomfortable. And so
Yeah.
acknowledging that, okay, I now have to move into that zone of discomfort.
Yeah, and one of the things that comes up a lot is the importance of knowing the person in front of you. Often, just from a human behavior perspective, we're going to offer something that we want. So if this is one big question I always have my leaders ask is, how do you like to give and receive feedback?
Yeah.
And that conversation goes both ways, because if I'm someone that's introverted and I need more time to process, then you might want to send some questions as a leader to your direct report that's introverted. Say, when we meet tomorrow, these are some of the things we're going to talk about. And, it goes both ways. If you're a peer and now you have a manager, you ask that person how they like to give and receive feedback. So that feeds into the transparency, but also just getting to know each other as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think having those sort of upfront conversations,
Mhm.
and as you say, sort of acknowledging, okay, look, I'm new in this role. We're going to have to, I want to learn a little bit more about you. I want to learn how you like to give and receive feedback. I also want to learn kind of, what motivates you. Let's
Yeah.
talk about what are your key strengths? How do I leverage those type of things? So the
Yeah.
conversation is not just about task, right?
Right. Right.
It's around taking some time out to sort of build relationships, because task will go much smoother when you do those things.
Yeah.
You know?
It's building that connection.
Right. But sometimes what happens, if I'm very good at what I do, I will come in as a manager and I will over focus on the task aspect of my job.
We see
Right.
that a lot, right? Don't we? In like
Yeah.
technical people that are in
Especially
very
yes, in technical roles, we see that
because the
hugely.
people
Right.
skills side of it is much more difficult, because you're really good at the technical side,
Right.
and it's a whole new not just a mindset, but like how you engage with people when you're in a leadership role.
Yeah, and the other thing too, you're not alone in this. And this is kind of like one of those transitional points in people's career. This might be one of your first transitions, or it depends in terms of when you do this. And so you can learn these skills, and you can build these competencies. And part of it is just embracing it and stuff like that. So let's talk what are some of the actionable tips that we would sort of think about, saying, okay, here are 3 or 4 things that you can do. So I mean,
Yeah.
we talked a little bit about them, but maybe we'll just summarize them.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the acknowledgement of the new roles. You can do that as a group and maybe have individual conversations, especially if you are closer to some people that you're now managing than others. Have a private conversation, ask a lot of questions of the person now reporting to you. What would help them, be successful in their
Yep.
role. Definitely realign, figure out your vision as a manager that's connected to the organizational vision, and then repeat that and share that with the team.
And yeah, and we talked about being transparent, which we've talked about in that whole set clear performance expectations, and don't be afraid to be confident about setting those clear expectations, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Are they clear?
Yeah.
So that because different people may need a little bit more. Lead by example. Authority is not demanded; it is earned, right? And you are in an authority role, and just because you were in an authority doesn't mean that people see you as a leader. Leadership is different than just authority. So it's developing leadership skills, not because you have the authority, but because you're going to develop as a leader, and not just because you have the authority to be that leader. And I think that's really important. You have to be kind of stay approachable, but you also have to be firm and clear. So if there are people, you know, where they need to get feedback, make sure that that feedback is clear. And as I think you, Renee, had talked a little bit about. So we don't have too much more time. So we just want to sort of say, look, what's one thing you can take forward in your role as a leader? And just take sort of one step, whether that be transparent, whether it be setting clear performance goals, or leading by example. Just reflect on one of those things. Next week, we will have another topic where we'll spend another 15 minutes in this similar structure. And so thank you all for your time today.